with one of their float planes. He circled round and then went away, obviously told the Germans, and they came back with a couple of bombers, which tried to make the captain pull the ensign down. But he said, no, it was a ruse de guerre, and under the Geneva Convention, they couldn't open fire, and nor must we. And so we spent part of the afternoon with them making bombing runs at us with their bomb doors open, and we wouldn't open fire, and they didn't drop their bombs, and eventually they got tired and went home. And we got through to Gibraltar, where, to our great relief, the Navy came and took the depth charges out and took them away, which was just as well.
That's an extraordinary experience, and for you that really must have been quite an experience, isn't it? I mean, the fact is, if the German bombers were coming over, and you know, just to let you know that they could drop the bombs if they wanted to, but you weren't sure whether they were going to do that or not.
Going to or not, no.
Right.
No.
So were you manning the guns, or were you told to stand away from your guns?
Oh, people were there at the guns, and in any case, they'd all got British tin hats on, so anyone knew very well they weren't French. But yes, they were. Anyway, nothing happened. Then, to our surprise, we were sent down to the Argentine, because up until then, ships had pretty well kept to the trades of their peacetime trades. And Portline went to Australia and New Zealand, and other people, Blue Star Line, holders, people like that, they went to South America. And although it was frozen meat, it wasn't our usual run. So we went down to the Argentine and loaded meat. It was very pleasant. Very big British community down there. They made us very welcome. Tried to teach us Spanish.
Did you land in BA? Whereabouts did you sail into?
La Plata.
Right.
I think the port is actually called Berisso. There's a river, a tributary goes up from Berisso up to La Plata, and we used to catch a tram from Berisso up to La Plata and then catch a train from there to BA. It wasn't very far, it was just a bit further up.
What were your impressions of Buenos Aires as a...
Oh, I liked it. Oh, yes, yes. Yes, went shopping in a great big shop. Gath and Chavez. Harrods, thinly disguised. Oh, very nice, yes. Yes, in those days, BA was quite a place, very.
How old were you, Alec? You were 16, 17?
Oh, I must have been 17 by then.
So you weren't allowed to go in the bars or have a drink or...
There were all sorts of things we weren't supposed to do, yes.
Okay.
But we
supposed to do.
We had a good time.
It's very diplomatic. But were you allowed? Did you go to dances, or were there seamen's mission?
Oh yes, yes. There were missions. There, in fact, you very often had a choice because there's always been the religious difference between the missions, so you could go with the Methodists in one, or the Church of England in another, or the Roman Catholics in another. I mean, there was quite a lot. Added to which, the English community were looking after us to the best of their ability. So you get invited home to tea and all sorts. It was very pleasant.
And the climate, good climate.
Yes, oh yes, as far as I remember. We then made a very short stay, very short call at Montevideo, and then back home, Trinidad for bunkers and home. And that was that. A few days back home here in Southampton. Then back to the Chalmers again. And again, a very funny cargo. And what are we up to now? Oh, we're not only carrying military equipment, but we're going to carry soldiers as well. The ship had a shelter deck, and they were building accommodation for hundreds of soldiers with hammocks in the shelter deck. And when it was time to sail, we were all ready, and along came about 300 soldiers. They doubled up the bunks in the passengers' accommodation, and the officers lived in the passengers' accommodation, and the men were down below in the hold. Off we went and joined an enormous convoy with big liners, P&O Straths, the Pasteur, all the big liners. And lo and behold, we're off to Singapore. So we went, this enormous convoy, all the way down to South Africa. Some of the ships went into Cape Town. Some went into Durban. Then we all assembled outside again and off in the direction of Singapore. But Singapore fell. And so there we were out in the Indian Ocean, 100 or so ships, thousands of men, and nowhere to go. We were sent to Bombay. Very soon put the soldiers ashore. That wasn't difficult. Very soon put the things like lorries and guns, things like that ashore. But the ammunition was another matter, and we hung about for weeks. But we eventually got it discharged, and were then told to go to Colombo to load gunny sacks, jute bagging, because of course in those days frozen meat was carried in jute sacks, all the hinds and fores and things. So we didn't think that was very strange. But at that stage, the Japanese had got a fleet of aircraft carriers out from Singapore. They had attacked Trincomalee. They had sunk an aircraft carrier. I think it was the Hermes. And we arrived at Colombo with several ships on fire and a lot of ships waiting outside, and we waited for days until eventually we put a boat down and the captain went ashore. When he came back, he said it was a very simple interview. He went into an office and the naval officer in charge said, "I'm sorry, Captain, I can't do anything for you." And the captain said, "I don't want you to do anything for me." And he said, can you get to Durban? And he said, "Of course I can get to Durban." And
we're going to go back to the point where you describe your captain lowering a boat and going ashore.
Yes, yes.
Is that all right?
yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
Okay. Okay. Alec.
Yes, we found ourselves waiting outside Colombo. There were some ships on fire, and nothing was happening. So eventually we put the lifeboat down, and the captain went ashore and found himself in front of an officer who had been telling everybody that he had nothing at all. Where we were at anchor, every ship except us hoisted, "I require bunkers, I require food, I require water," every morning, but nothing happened. So when the captain went ashore, the naval officer said, "I can do nothing for you." And the captain said, "I don't want you to do anything for me." When he said that he could get to Durban, then he was told, then go to Durban, and that was that. So we went to Durban, and again from Durban, we went across to BA again, which was very pleasant because we'd been there a few months before, so people knew us and we knew where to go and things like that, which was very nice. A full cargo of meat, and again, back home. We'd waited so long in Bombay that I think the whole voyage had taken 6 months or thereabouts. But there we were, we'd made it, and we were back.
Well, when you say you made it, back to where? To Liverpool?
Back to Liverpool,
Back
yes.
to Liverpool.
Yes, we seemed to be in and out of Liverpool then. Came home for a few days, and back again to join the same ship. And again, another funny cargo. And they just said that even the dockers on the quay, everybody said, "You are going to Malta," which, as we'd been to Malta the year before, we knew that there was going to be something. All sorts of things were happening. Special ventilators were put in some of the holds for ventilating the petrol, which was actually in tins. To the latter end of the war, people think, tin petrol, it's those jerry cans that the Yanks had. But no, it wasn't. They were thin, flimsy tins. If you can remember back that far, the Chinese used to export eggs. They broke the eggshells and put the eggs in tins, and these tins were very much like that. 2 5-gallon tins in a cardboard box. If some of them got pierced, and the smell was, so there was a special extractor built on one of the ventilators. Otherwise, we had ammunition in some of the holds. We had foodstuffs. We had guns. We had Bren gun carriers. We had all sorts of things. I got in trouble later on in life. I was accused of not paying attention at a lecture, and I wasn't paying attention, I must admit, because they were telling me that under the regulations, if you had more than about half a hundredweight of shotgun ammunition, you had to have a special box, and you had to see that the men who loaded it had felt-covered shoes, and etc., etc. And eventually the lecturer said, "You're not paying attention. Do you know anything about this?" And I said, "Well, yes, I did." And he said, "Then perhaps you wouldn't mind telling the class what you know about it." And I said, "Well, you start at the bottom and you load ammunition and you keep it flat. You make sure the stow is flat and you bring it up until you judge it's the right height from the deck head. And then you get Bren gun carriers and you put them on top of the ammunition and you start them up and you drive them out into the corners of the holes. And he refused to believe it. But equally, I wouldn't believe that you needed felt-covered shoes to carry a few boxes of... But of course, there wasn't a war on by then. And so the Chalmers went on Operation Pedestal, which...
Can you just describe leaving Liverpool as well? How many of you were there? How many ships actually left Liverpool? Where did the convoy assemble?
We left just as an ordinary ship by ourselves, and we went up to the tail of the bank, and the convoy assembled there. And it then became obvious that there were 14 merchant ships altogether, including one tanker. And we went out into the Atlantic and did a few maneuvers, but of course by that time in the war we'd all been in convoys, and as I said before, we weren't trained, but we got trained because by that time we'd been another year at it. And we went, the escort got bigger and bigger, and we went through Gibraltar. At one stage there were actually 5 aircraft carriers, one of which was loaded with Spitfires, which had nothing to do with us. In any case, they hadn't got any guns. We'd probably got the guns. And they were to fly off at the furthest distance they could and fly to Malta, which they did. And then the aircraft carrier went back. There was an old carrier called the Argus, which was out there for practice purposes and anti-submarine patrols, and then she went back. And then, unfortunately, the first thing of note that happened was that one perfectly ordinary, good, fine afternoon, there were 4 bangs underwater. We thought they might be depth charges, but we looked around, and HMS Eagle aircraft carrier was heeling over. Aircraft were falling off her decks as she went, and she was gone in a matter of minutes. Which of course is a bit unnerving when you think, you've been thinking to yourself, oh, we're all right, we've got 3 aircraft carriers. And the first thing that happens is one of them is sunk. And that was the beginning. Things happened both by day and night. Attacks, high level, low level. During the day, some during the first night, not much. The second night, of course, was an entirely different business. The Germans and Italians had a good go at the escort on the afternoon of what must it have been? Must have been the 12th of August. Because they knew, as well as anybody else knew, that they were not going to send battleships and aircraft carriers further than Cape Bon, because it would have been a death trap for them. And so they had a good go at them before they turned back. We had got to form from 4 lines into 2 to go through a minefield, and they had got a submarine waiting at the edge of the minefield, and he torpedoed the 2 cruisers that were leading us into the gap. So for a while there were ships all over the place, and more aircraft attacks as the evening wore on. I think the Commodore of the convoy at that stage decided that it was hopeless and we'd better go back. Now, I've heard various versions of this since, but I do know that at one stage we were heading back as if towards Gibraltar. But a destroyer came alongside us and said something like, "Steer east, the Admiral's waiting." So we turned round and we steered east. We didn't find the Admiral, possibly because he was in HMS Manchester and it was sunk. But we got through the night. There were E-boats, there were all sorts of things happening. And the next morning, there were very few of us left. Attacks came in again. Somebody saw a torpedo coming. The captain turned the ship hard to starboard. The next thing we knew, the paravane gear was jumping up and down. We thought, obviously, we'd got a mine, so we hoisted a signal, had mine in starboard paravane. But when we recovered the starboard paravane, we found we'd got a torpedo in it, which was quite remarkable because the tail of a torpedo is small, less than a foot square, and the cutters of a paravane are pretty small, something like 6 inches long, and to manage to get the tail of one into the jaws of the other was quite remarkable. We got rid of that by cutting the recovery wires, and there was a bit of a bang when it hit the seabed. There are various reports I've read about how far the ship jumped out of the water. I don't think the ship actually jumped very far out of the water, but I do think that the stewards managed to cover all their breakages for several voyages on the grounds that the explosion had broken all the crockery in sight. At that stage, of course, having stopped the engines to get rid of the paravane, we were astern of what was left of the convoy, and as we began to catch them up, another attack came with dive bombers, and as we approached, a ship blew up. We'd seen ships on fire before, but this one just blew up. It blew apart. I'll have to remember the name, but any other time I would know. Yes, it just, one moment it was there, and the next thing, there was a big red glow and pieces of ship were coming out of the cloud of smoke. There were some survivors, and a destroyer went over and put a whaler down. They were rowing whalers in those days, and the crew rowed in among the flaming oil and picked up men. And so actually, on the day that we arrived in Malta, there were 3 ships. And the people who turned out because they'd heard that a convoy was coming were very disappointed, because there was just the Rochester Castle, the Melbourne Star, and the port charmers. The next day, the Brisbane Star, which had got a hole in its bow where it had been hit by a torpedo, came in. And the day after that, the tanker Ohio, which had been hit time and time again, been abandoned, boarded, towed, anything you can think of had happened to it, was literally dragged in to the harbour, into Valletta, where they had to be very careful how they pumped it out, because they thought it might break up as they pumped the cargo out. But they managed to get the cargo out. Again, there are some tales told, but of course she had diesel oil for submarines and paraffin for heating and lighting purposes. There are reports that she was carrying high octane for the Spitfires, but we had the high octane in the tins. If you think about Malta, if you'd had high octane in a tanker in Valletta Harbour, you couldn't have got it up to the airfields anyway, because there were no pipelines. So it had got to go up there in tins, and it was the merchant ships that carried the tins, which of course accounted for the way they went up in some cases when they were hit.
I'm just going to stop you 1 second. Sorry, Alec, I
Right.
apologise.
We're going to be out of time, aren't we?
Are you all right for a minute? 5 minutes? Or
Oh,
you're right? 5
Yes.
minutes? Okay.
well, if you don't get there late, you don't get there late. Shall I?
No, I'm thinking about the car park.
6:30. You've got 3 hours on it to prepare.
Yes,
Well, I think it starts at 6.
6:30. Does it?
Yeah.
This is
Ah.
a continuation of an interview with Captain Alec G.W. Miller on 31st of March 2004 for the Merchant Navy project. Alec, I just wanted to go back over, you've described your extraordinary journey on Pedestal, and it's very difficult for us to even begin to imagine. I'm thinking of myself as a 17-year-old boy and listening to you describe your journey into Malta and being under air attack and being under attack from
I think
E-boats.
I was 18.
U-boats.
I was 18 by then.
I was even worse at 18. And, I mean, it's just a kind of grim determination on the part of everybody to get there, sort of no matter what, really. I mean, I know you were following orders, but it must have been extremely, extremely difficult to keep going, wasn't it?
Well, there's not a lot else you can do.
Mm.
Even if you're scared to death, you've still got to keep going. But yes, it's.
Nobody slept, I take it. I mean, did
Well,
you
yes.
sleep
we-
at all?
well, nobody took their clothes off.
No.
But we ate when we could, what we could, and we slept if we could. And
What kind of manoeuvres does your captain make, or when a Stuka dive bomber attacks? What is the protocol?
in a convoy, you've just got to put up with it, because you can't. If one captain decided to go hard a port and the other one decided to go hard a starboard, you'd have a collision, and that would be that. No, you've just got to put up with it. If you're a single ship, then you can put the helm hard over at the last minute and hope that it will just that it'll miss by that much. After all, a miss is a miss. A hit is a hit, but a miss is a miss, whether it's a long way off or
What
close
armaments
to.
did you have to fire back?